Walk us through your decision to resign rather than trying to protest from within.
Sure. So I, like most employees, found out about this through the Intercept reporting on August 1st. I will say it was a very vocal 3 weeks following that. Within that week, I was trying to raise concerns internally. There was a lot of pushback and talking about it. It was phrased as a very exploratory project. Not many managers really knew anything about it. So as an employee, when you try and raise such a concern, you're essentially told, just wait for a company-wide discussion and then your concerns will eventually be handled. A few days of this, I submitted a conditional resignation saying if this turns out to be true, then I'm forced to resign for ethical reasons. Still, even after submitting that conditional resignation, still I essentially received no clarification on what red lines might be crossed. And then after enough time passed, say another week and a half, I submitted a formal resignation. I wrote a 5-page, very well-cited document explaining my reasons, some of which you quoted at the very end, and then circulated that throughout the company.
Another part of that document, Jack, that you wrote, you say, I'm forced to resign in order to avoid contributing to or profiting from the erosion of protections for dissidents. There is an all too real possibility that other nations will attempt to leverage our actions in China in order to demand our compliance with their security demands. Meantime, what Google has said about all of this, they say we've been investing for many years to help Chinese users from developing Android through mobile apps like Google Translate and Files Go and our developers tools, but our work on search has been exploratory and we are not close to launching a search product in China. What are your real concerns about Google going back into China and potentially censoring results according to Chinese law?
Yeah, so I would defer to the Human Rights Coalition letter that was written on August 28th from 14 organizations, including Amnesty International, Electronic Frontiers Foundation, Human Rights Watch, Human Rights in China. The list goes on. They laid out their concerns pretty clearly. They can say it much more eloquently and with more authority than I can. So I would call on everyone to read that. And in particular, part of the reason I ended up resigning is before I left, that letter came out. And I tried to raise it as a point as to why the human rights concerns have, are an issue, and that letter was still not responded to either internally or publicly. Now, to your point about this only being exploratory, I think it's really important to call attention to the AI principles, which were laid out as a response to earlier internal organizing efforts, in particular surrounding Project Maven. So what's stated very explicitly in the AI principles is that Google commits to not design or deploy technologies whose purpose contravenes widely accepted international law or human rights concerns. Now, I'd say there's a lot of push for this to be seen as exploratory, but I don't think it's debatable that this at least passed the design phase. So I think that coupled with this human rights letter is a pretty clear crossing of the currently written down red lines. And so to quote a colleague, Meredith Whitaker, I don't think employees at tech companies should accept vague feel-good statements in exchange for meaningful accountability. So what I'm calling for right now is meaningful accountability. In particular, if we're stating we care about human rights, we need to respond to human rights organizations.
By our last count, more than 1,400 employees signed a letter demanding that Google appoint someone to assess the, quote, urgent moral and ethical issues raised by this particular plan. Do you have any new metrics about the scale of the frustration there? Any stories you can share about your colleagues and how they're feeling?
I don't want to speak too much for my colleagues except to tell them that you're not alone. And if this is something that you have concerns with, there's a broad movement that you can join, including the Tech Workers Coalition and Tech Solidarity. Within Google, there was, as I stated earlier, very effective internal organizing surrounding Project Maven, and most recently with the Ethics Code Yellow Call, which was, for better or for worse, leaked to the New York Times with those 1,400 signatures.
Now, in the recent months, we've seen dissenters at Google protest the company's work with the Pentagon. Google, in that instance, decided to let its contract with the Pentagon lapse. There's also been dissent on both sides about how Google handles diversity, where you have diversity advocates within the company say the company is not doing enough, and others like James Damore who feel that they're being ostracized as a result of these efforts. Do you think Google cares about dissent?
I'd say that that's almost beside the point. What I really care about is accountability as opposed to what the care is or is not. And I think in this case, it's pretty clear that there hasn't been accountability so far. And that's part of why I'm resigning, is to call for accountability and a response to human rights organizations.
So what will you do otherwise now that you've resigned?
I'll say that it's been pretty surprising exactly how positive the response has been. Within the last, 2-3 days, I've had 30 job offers, let's say, an endless stream of extremely positive, unsolicited emails, and I think I've received 1 hate mail and 100 positive messages at least. So I'm not worried at this point, to say the least. And I would encourage other employees thinking of speaking out to realize that this isn't as scary as it may sound.